In the sterile, fluorescent-lit world of corporate ambition, loyalty is often the first casualty, a fragile ghost haunting the hallways where dreams come to die. It is a silent agreement, an unspoken trust that one colleague has the other's back, that hard work will be rewarded, and that the ladder of success is meant to be climbed, not kicked out from under you. But sometimes, the most brutal lessons are not taught in boardrooms, but in the cold, stark betrayal of a single email. An email that can unravel a man's entire world in the space of a few damning words. For Liam Carter, a senior analyst at the prestigious marketing firm Innovate, that Tuesday began like any other. The air hummed with the familiar symphony of keystrokes and quiet conversations, the scent of burnt coffee hanging heavy in the air. He felt a quiet hum of anticipation, a nervous energy that had been his constant companion for weeks. Today was the day. The official announcement for the new senior marketing director position was due, a role he had bled for, sacrificing nights and weekends, pouring every ounce of his creativity into the Project Titan campaign. It was his masterpiece, a project so successful it had single-handedly landed the firm its largest client in a decade. His boss, David Chen, had all but promised him the promotion, clapping him on the back and speaking of bright futures and inevitable rewards. At precisely 10 a.m., the notification popped up in the corner of his screen. Company-wide announcement. New senior leadership appointment. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. He took a deep breath, clicked open the email, his eyes scanning past the corporate platitudes for the one name that mattered. But it wasn't his. The world around him seemed to slow, the ambient noise of the office dissolving into a dull, distant roar. There, in bold, unforgiving letters, was the name Jessica Riley. Jessica, his protégé, the junior analyst he had mentored, nurtured, and championed since her first day. He had brought her onto Project Titan, shared his strategies, his contacts, his vision. He had trusted her. A cold dread, sharp and suffocating, washed over him. It wasn't just disappointment. It was a physical blow, a hollowing out of his chest that left him breathless. He looked up from his screen, his gaze sweeping across the open-plan office until it landed on her. She was surrounded by a small crowd, accepting congratulations with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a fleeting second, her gaze met his across the sea of cubicles. There was no triumph in her look, no apology. There was only a flicker of something cold, something calculated, before she quickly turned away. And standing just behind her, placing a congratulatory hand on her shoulder, was David Chen, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. The promise, the trust, the years of dedication, it all curdled into a single, sickening realization. He hadn't just been overlooked. He had been erased. To understand the depth of the chasm that had just opened in Liam Carter's life, one must first understand the man himself. He was not born into the world of corner offices and power lunches. He was a product of the Rust Belt, a son of a steelworker and a librarian, raised in a small town where your word was your bond and success was measured not by your title, but by the sweat on your brow and the integrity in your heart. His father, a man whose hands were permanently calloused from a lifetime of honest labor, had taught him a simple, unwavering philosophy. Work hard, be honest, and your efforts will carve out your place in the world. It was a creed Liam had carried with him from the worn-out linoleum floors of his public high school to the hallowed, ivy-covered halls of the state university he'd attended on a scholarship. He was the first in his family to get a degree, and he wore that achievement not with arrogance, but with a profound sense of responsibility. He was living the dream his parents had sacrificed for, and he was determined not to fail. Liam was, by nature, a builder. He didn't play the political games that thrived in the corporate ecosystem of Innovate. He found them distasteful, a distraction from the actual work. While others networked over expensive scotch or sharpened their knives in hushed conversations by the water cooler, Liam was in his cubicle, deconstructing market data, finding the hidden narratives within the numbers, and building campaigns from the ground up. He was meticulous, patient, and driven by a genuine passion for his craft. His colleagues respected his work ethic, even if they found his aversion to office politics naive. They saw him as a reliable workhorse, the brilliant analyst who could always be counted on to deliver, but perhaps not the kind of person who knew how to play the game, how to manage perceptions, how to sell himself as effectively as he sold his clients' products. He believed, with an almost religious fervor, in the idea of a meritocracy, that the best ideas, the hardest work, and the most impactful results would inevitably rise to the top. It was this deeply ingrained belief that now made his reality so incomprehensible. His life outside the office was his anchor. His wife, Anna, was a kindergarten teacher, a woman whose warmth and empathy were a soothing balm to the sharp, often cynical edges of the corporate world. They had a small house in the suburbs, a mountain of student debt they were diligently chipping away at, and a shared dream of a life defined by simple joys, traveling, raising a family, growing old together. Just last Saturday, as they sat on their back porch watching the sunset, Anna had been scrolling through pictures of the Amalfi Coast on her tablet. "Can you imagine?" she had whispered, her head resting on his shoulder. "Us, there. No emails, no deadlines." Liam had smiled, pulling her closer. "Soon," he'd promised. "After the promotion, I swear. First thing we do is book the tickets. No more maybes." The memory was now a shard of glass in his mind, twisting with a fresh, searing pain. This betrayal wasn't just about a title or a salary increase. It was about the future he had promised his family, a future built on a foundation that had just crumbled into dust. His relationship with David Chen had been, for years, the cornerstone of his professional life. David had hired him straight out of business school, seeing a spark of raw talent and a hunger to succeed. In the early years, David was the consummate mentor, guiding Liam through the complexities of the industry, offering invaluable advice, and championing his work. "You've got a rare talent, Liam," he'd said during one performance review, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. "You see things others miss. You're the future of this department." Liam had held on to those words, treating them as gospel. He saw David not just as a boss, but as a genuine advocate. He had failed to see the subtle shift over the past year, the way David's praise had become more generic, his attention more divided. He'd failed to recognize that David wasn't a mentor building a legacy, but a king protecting his throne, and that kings often required sacrifices to maintain their power. David didn't value loyalty, he valued leverage. Liam had provided the results, the raw material for success, but he had never been part of David's inner circle, the cabal of political players who understood that power was a game of alliances and convenient betrayals. And then there was Jessica. The betrayal from David was a blow, but the one from Jessica was a knife to the heart. He remembered her first day as a nervous intern, wide-eyed and overwhelmed, clutching her portfolio as if it were a life raft. He saw a younger version of himself in her, the same ambition, the same raw intelligence, the same feeling of being an outsider trying to prove their worth. He took her under his wing, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to see her succeed. He spent hours after work explaining complex concepts. He invited her to high-level meetings so she could learn, and he gave her credit, often deflecting praise for his own work to highlight her contributions. When he conceived of Project Titan, he fought to have her assigned to his team, despite her inexperience. "She's hungry, David," he had argued. "She's got a fresh perspective." Together, they had lived and breathed Project Titan for 6 months. They were the first to arrive and the last to leave. He had shared everything with her, his methodology, his contacts, his strategic vision. He treated her as a partner, an equal. He remembered one late night, weeks before the final presentation, when they were both exhausted and running on caffeine and adrenaline. Jessica had looked at him, her expression full of what he had mistaken for sincere gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you, Liam," she'd said. "No one's ever given me a chance like this. I'll never forget what you've done for me." He had simply smiled and told her that her success was all the thanks he needed. Now, replaying that moment, he could see the lie coiled behind her eyes. Her gratitude wasn't for the opportunity he had given her, but for the ammunition. He had handed her the map, the keys, and the weapon, and she had used them to stage a coup. He had seen her as a protégé, but she had seen him as a stepping stone, the final rung on a ladder she was more than willing to kick away once she reached the top. As Liam sat frozen at his desk, the cheerful congratulations for Jessica echoing in the office like a funeral dirge, the initial shock began to recede. The icy numbness that had gripped him started to thaw, replaced by something else, something hot and unfamiliar. It was a slow burning rage, a feeling so intense it was almost clarifying. His father's words echoed in his mind, but they were twisted into a new, bitter shape. Work hard, be honest. In the real world, those were not the rules. They were vulnerabilities to be exploited. He had been a fool, a naive believer in a system that was rotten to the core. He looked again at Jessica, who was now laughing at something David had said. They were a perfect pair, predators who had found their prey. The builder in Liam, the man who meticulously constructed campaigns and strategies, felt a new impulse. The desire to create was gone. In its place, a cold, precise, and patient desire began to form, the desire to deconstruct. He was going to take apart their world, just as they had taken apart his, piece by piece. The hours that followed the announcement were a masterclass in corporate theater. The office, once a familiar landscape, transformed into a hostile territory where every smile seemed predatory and every hushed conversation felt like a verdict being passed on his failure. Liam remained at his desk, a statue amidst the flow of feigned celebration, the damning email still glowing on his monitor. The congratulations being offered to Jessica were loud and effusive, a stark contrast to the awkward silence that now formed a bubble around his cubicle. People who had been his friends, who had shared lunches and complained about deadlines with him, now scurried past with their eyes fixed on their phones or the floor, as if his disappointment were a contagious disease. He knew he couldn't sit there forever, a ghost at a feast celebrating his own demise. He needed answers, not for closure, but for clarity. The shock was hardening into a cold, analytical resolve. He needed to understand the mechanics of his own execution. He found David in his glass-walled office, a fishbowl of corporate power. David was on the phone, laughing, but his smile tightened when he saw Liam standing in the doorway. He gestured for him to come in, finishing his call with a brisk, "We'll circle back on the deliverables." The door clicked shut, sealing them in. "Liam," David began, his voice a carefully modulated blend of sympathy and authority. "Tough morning. I was going to come find you. Look, I know you're disappointed, and you have every right to be." Liam stood silent, letting the practiced words hang in the air. "I want you to know this wasn't a reflection on your work," David continued, picking up an expensive-looking fountain pen and examining it. "Project Titan was a masterpiece, your masterpiece. But leadership is a different animal. It's about optics, about client-facing charisma. Jessica, she just has that spark. She knows how to command a room. We felt she was a better fit for the public-facing aspects of the director role. It was a perfectly crafted speech, designed to sound reasonable while saying nothing at all. He was being compartmentalized, defined as the backroom genius, the numbers guy who wasn't fit for the spotlight. So my work gets the company its biggest contract, but I'm not the right fit to lead the department I just saved?" Liam asked, his voice dangerously quiet. David sighed, a weary performance of a leader burdened by tough decisions. "It's not that simple, Liam. It's about synergy, about the long-term strategic vision." Jessica presented a compelling plan for the department's future. Her initiative was impressive. The word initiative landed like a stone. "Her initiative?" Liam repeated, the pieces starting to click together in a sickening pattern. David finally met his gaze, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Look, your contributions have been noted, and they will be rewarded. There are other avenues, other projects. Let's not let one decision derail your fantastic career here. We still need you, Liam. You're a vital part of the team." It was a threat wrapped in a compliment, a velvet-gloved command to accept his fate and fall back in line. He was being offered a pat on the head and a place in the corner, while the spoils of his victory were handed to someone else. His encounter with Jessica was even more chilling. He found her by the coffee machine, momentarily alone. She flinched when she saw him, her celebratory smile vanishing. "Liam," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Congratulations," he said, the word tasting like ash. "You must have worked very hard on your compelling plan for the department." A flicker of defiance hardened her features. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Don't do this, Liam. Not here." He stepped closer. "I just want to understand. The project, the strategy, that was my work. Our work." She let out a short, sharp breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "And you taught me so much," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine poison. "You taught me that this is a business. You taught me to be ambitious and to never wait for an opportunity to be handed to you. So I didn't. I saw a path and I took it. It wasn't personal." The sheer audacity of her twisting his own mentorship into a weapon left him speechless. It was personal. It was the most personal thing that had ever happened to him. She had taken his trust, his guidance, and his intellectual property and used it to systematically dismantle his career. As she turned to walk away, he asked one last question. "How? How did you present my work as yours?" She paused, her back still to him. "David and I had been discussing the department's future for a while," she said coolly. "He was impressed with my vision. I just made a few tweaks to the Project Titan strategy deck to better reflect that vision. I guess the board was impressed too." And with that, she walked away, leaving him with the final, brutal truth. She hadn't just stolen his work after the fact. She had been co-opting it, rebranding it, and selling it as her own in secret meetings behind his back for months. The conspiracy wasn't a last-minute decision. It was a long, calculated campaign of deceit. That evening, Liam couldn't bring himself to go home. He couldn't face Anna, couldn't bear to see the disappointment in her eyes or voice the words that would shatter their shared dreams. The office was quiet now, a tomb of darkened monitors and empty chairs. The ghosts of the day's events whispered from every corner. But Liam's grief was now being consumed by a cold, methodical fury. He wasn't a hacker, but he was an analyst. He understood systems, data, and the digital footprints people carelessly left behind. He sat at his desk and began to dig. He started with shared calendars, then project folders on the company server, and there it was. A folder buried deep in a project archive titled Dept Future Vision JR, Jessica's initials. His access was restricted, but the folder properties told him enough. It had been created 3 months ago. The modification history showed a flurry of activity, primarily from Jessica and David. The real discovery, the one that turned his blood to ice, came from a place of pure, stupid luck. The high-end network printer down the hall had a history log of scanned documents. Most were purged daily, but a few large files sometimes got stuck in the cache. He scrolled through the list of print jobs, and one file name caught his eye. Liam, Management, Strategy, PDF. It was a print job from David Chen's computer, dated 2 weeks ago. Liam felt a surge of adrenaline. With a few clicks, he accessed the cached image. It wasn't a document he'd written. It was an email chain. An email from Jessica to David. Subject: Liam Management Strategy. The text was clear and damning. "David," it began. "Attached are my final notes on Liam's Titan presentation. As discussed, I've repurposed the core data into a new deck under my name that emphasizes my leadership role. Once the client is officially signed, we can move forward with the transition plan. For now, we need to keep managing his expectations. He's fully focused on the promotion and has no idea we're positioning me for the role. Let's ensure he continues to feel valued until the announcement. The last thing we need is him making waves before this is finalized." Liam read it once, then twice, then a third time. Every word was a nail in his professional coffin. Managing his expectations, keep him feeling valued. He wasn't a colleague. He was an asset to be managed, a problem to be contained. The polite corporate doublespeak, the empty promises, the feigned mentorship, it was all there, laid bare in cold, black and white text. This single document was the Rosetta Stone of his betrayal. It was the proof. He saved the file to a hidden folder on his personal thumb drive, his movements calm and precise. The pain was still there, a deep, throbbing ache in his chest. But now, it was accompanied by something new, a chilling sense of purpose. They thought he was a workhorse, a naive believer in a broken system. They thought he was a man who could be managed. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Driving home that night, the city lights blurred into streaks of indifferent color. Each traffic light was a pause, a moment for the cold, hard reality of the day to press in on him. He clutched the steering wheel, his knuckles white, the thumb drive in his pocket feeling as heavy as a block of lead. It was the proof, the truth, but it was also a poison. Exposing the conspiracy would mean exposing himself to the corporate machine's wrath, a battle he, a lone analyst with a mortgage and a mountain of debt, could not afford to fight. The victory would be purely moral, and morality didn't pay the bills. He was trapped, armed with a truth he could not speak, forced to carry the knowledge of his own ruin like a secret shame. The hardest part was yet to come, telling Anna. He had to walk into the one place he felt safe and admit that the world he had built for them was a house of cards, and a gust of wind had just blown it all away. He found her in the living room, curled on the sofa with a book, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating her face. She looked up and smiled when he walked in, but her smile faltered as she saw his expression. "Liam? What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." He didn't speak, just sank down beside her, the weight of the day finally crushing him. He took her hand, and in a low, hollow voice, he told her everything. He told her about the email, about David's empty promises, and about Jessica's chilling, unapologetic betrayal. He told her about the stolen project, the lies, and the carefully orchestrated plan to erase him. As he spoke, he watched the hope drain from her eyes, replaced by a dawning horror and a fierce, protective anger on his behalf. When he finished, the silence in the room was profound. She didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. She simply wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight. "So what do we do?" She whispered into his shoulder, and the simple, terrifying honesty of the question broke him. For the first time that day, Liam Carter allowed himself to feel the full, unvarnished despair of his situation, and he wept. Returning to the office the next day was like willingly walking back into his own nightmare. The atmosphere was thick with a new, oppressive order. Jessica, emboldened by her new title, called a mandatory team meeting first thing in the morning. She stood at the head of the conference table, the same table where Liam had spent countless hours whiteboarding the very strategies she was now claiming as her own. She spoke of a new era of innovation and a paradigm shift for the department, using a flurry of corporate buzzwords to disguise the fact that her entire vision was a plagiarized version of Liam's Project Titan roadmap. She presented his data, his market analysis, his key performance indicators. The only change was the name on the first slide. Liam sat through the presentation, his face a neutral mask, his hands clasped so tightly under the table that his nails dug into his palms. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, a mixture of pity and fear. They all knew. They knew it was his work, but they remained silent, complicit in their quiet deference to the new queen. The days that followed descended into a quiet, sustained campaign of psychological warfare. Jessica seemed to take a perverse pleasure in asserting her newfound authority over him. His projects were reassigned. He was left off crucial email chains. His primary responsibility became managing the tedious, low-level data analytics for the very campaign he had created, a task usually given to interns. He was being systematically marginalized, his expertise and experience rendered irrelevant. In meetings, Jessica would publicly question his findings, framing her queries with phrases like, "Liam, help me understand your thinking here," as if he were a struggling junior who needed her guidance. David Chen would watch these exchanges with a look of detached approval, the architect observing his creation functioning perfectly. Liam was being taught a lesson. He was a cog, and cogs were replaceable. His only function now was to serve as a cautionary tale to anyone else who might dare to believe that hard work alone was enough. He learned to master the art of suppression. He walled off his fury, packing it down deep inside where it smoldered like coal. On the surface, He was the model employee, punctual, diligent, and compliant. He completed his menial tasks with a detached efficiency. He responded to Jessica's condescending emails with unwavering professionalism. He nodded politely in meetings and offered no opinions unless directly asked. This placid exterior was his armor, his only defense against a system designed to break him. But beneath the calm, a tempest raged. Every morning, he had to remind himself why he was enduring this humiliation. For Anna, for their home, for the simple fact that walking away would be a surrender, an admission that they had truly won. He was a prisoner, and the office was his cell, but he refused to let them see him rattle the bars. His isolation was absolute. The colleagues who had once been his friends now treated him with a polite but firm distance. The lunch invitations stopped. The casual conversations in the break room would die down as soon as he approached. He was a pariah, a living reminder of the brutal politics of their world, and no one wanted to stand too close for fear of catching the same disease. He ate his lunch alone at his desk, staring at his monitor, the silence of his self-imposed exile a constant companion. He had lost more than a promotion. He had lost his professional identity, his community, his sense of belonging. Innovate had been more than a job. For 10 years, it had been the central pillar of his life. Now, it was just a place he went to be reminded of his own obsolescence. The breaking point, the moment the victim finally died and something else was born, came during his quarterly performance review. It was just him and Jessica, in a small, windowless conference room. It was the ultimate humiliation, a final twist of the knife. She slid his performance report across the table, her face a mask of professional concern. "Liam," she began, "we need to talk about your engagement levels. There's a perception that you've been coasting since the departmental restructuring." She then proceeded to critique his work, using the very metrics he himself had designed. She talked about his lack of proactive leadership and his failure to contribute to the new strategic vision. She was reading from a script, and he knew with chilling certainty that David Chen was the author. As she spoke, Liam's internal storm went quiet. The rage, the hurt, the despair, it all went still, coalescing into a single point of cold, diamond-hard clarity. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as the woman who had betrayed him, but as a problem to be analyzed. He saw the insecurity behind her arrogance, the fear of being exposed as a fraud. He thought of David, a man so terrified of being overshadowed that he had to destroy any subordinate who shone too brightly. They weren't gods. They were just flawed, fearful people who had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated him. They had assumed the man they had broken would stay broken. He walked out of that meeting a different man. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a weakness, it was fuel. As he walked back to his desk, the office no longer looked like a prison. It looked like a chessboard. He saw the pieces, the players, their strengths, and their vulnerabilities. He was no longer thinking about the injustice. He was thinking about strategy. The analyst, the builder, the man who saw the hidden narratives in the numbers, was back. But this time, he wasn't building a campaign. He was designing a war. He sat down, opened a new, encrypted file on his personal drive, and for the first time in weeks, he began to type. The document was not filled with rage or complaints. It was a list of names, of routines, of digital pathways, of corporate bylaws, of every single vulnerability he could find within the company that had tried to bury him. He was done suppressing. He was done enduring. The hunt had begun. The cold, meticulous anger that had taken root in Liam's soul required a specific kind of soil to grow: opportunity. For weeks, he played the part of the beaten man, the compliant subordinate. He performed his menial tasks, kept his head down, and watched. He was a strategist, observing the enemy's movements, learning their rhythms, their vanities, their fatal weaknesses. The opportunity he was waiting for arrived, as it often does, cloaked in the guise of a routine quarterly planning meeting for the Titan client, the massive account that had been the grand prize of his stolen project. The client was everything to Innovate, and their satisfaction was paramount. In the sterile conference room, Jessica stood at the head of the table, radiating a brittle confidence as she presented her strategy for the next quarter. David sat beside her, beaming like a proud father. It was a disaster. Jessica's plan was a hollow echo of corporate jargon, a superficial collection of buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and brand actualization. It was clear to Liam, and to anyone who actually understood the client, that she had no grasp of their core business, their conservative culture, or their absolute reliance on data-driven results. She proposed a radical shift in their marketing, moving a huge portion of the budget into a high-risk, unproven social media venture with a flashy but controversial influencer. She had mistaken the client's desire for innovation with a desire for recklessness. As she spoke, Liam watched the face of the senior client representative on the large video screen. He saw the polite, strained smile, the subtle tightening around the eyes, the courteous nod that held no actual agreement. He knew that look. It was the look of a client starting to doubt their choice of agency. And in that moment, Liam saw the crack. He saw the path forward. His plan, which had been a theoretical blueprint of anger, began to solidify into a tangible weapon. His transformation at the office was subtle but immediate. The next day, the sullen, withdrawn Liam was gone. In his place was a new version, helpful, engaged, and relentlessly positive. When Jessica discussed her flawed strategy, he no longer sat in stony silence. He chimed in with encouragement. "That's a bold move, Jessica," he'd say with practiced sincerity. "Challenging the client's comfort zone is a high-risk, high-reward play. It's the kind of innovative thinking this department needs." He became her most ardent supporter, her most efficient soldier. When she asked him to pull the numbers to support her influencer campaign, he delivered exactly what she asked for: a mountain of raw, unfiltered data, so vast and complex it was functionally useless without his expert interpretation, which he conveniently failed to provide. He was maliciously compliant, a smiling ghost in the machine, actively helping his enemies dig their own graves. His new focus was documentation. He started a meticulous, color-coded private log. Every condescending directive, every ill-conceived order, every conversation was recorded with dates, times, and verbatim quotes. He became a master of the carefully worded email, a digital artist painting a masterpiece of plausible deniability. After Jessica formally instructed him to reallocate the tightened budget, he sent a follow-up email that was a work of art in its subtlety. "Hi, Jessica," he wrote. "This email is to confirm your directive to proceed with the influencer campaign and to move the designated funds from the proven digital ad spend. I'm attaching my original analysis from Project Titan that projected a 35% ROI on the digital ads just for our records. Obviously, your new strategy supersedes this, and I'm excited to see the results of this fresh approach. I will execute the budget transfer by end of day. All the best, Liam." He made sure to CC David, and, on a mistake that was no mistake at all, he also CC'd Maria in the finance department. Maria was a quiet, stern woman in her late 50s who had been at Innovate for over 20 years. She was the company's institutional memory, a silent observer who had seen countless ambitious young executives rise and fall. She saw everything, especially when it came to the flow of money. A few days after Liam sent his email, he passed her in the hallway. She didn't stop or slow down, but she met his gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Keep good records, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she passed. Budgets have a way of telling the truth, even when people don't. It was all the confirmation he needed. He wasn't entirely alone. He had an unwitting, or perhaps very witting, ally in the one department that could officially validate the financial consequences of Jessica's impending failure. The culmination of his plan, the first true move of his counteroffensive, centered on the launch of Jessica's doomed campaign. She was giddy with a sense of her own brilliance, blind to the cliff's edge she was sprinting towards. She had pushed the timeline, eager to prove herself, and had ignored a series of polite, data-backed warnings from the junior members of the Titan client's marketing team, which Liam had made sure were all forwarded to him. She saw their caution as timidity. She saw Liam's compliance as acceptance of her superiority. Her arrogance was now his most powerful weapon. She signed off on the final, massive wire transfer to the influencer's management company, a sum that made Liam's stomach churn, even as he knew it was a necessary sacrifice. On the night of the launch, the office was empty save for him. The campaign was fully loaded, the digital assets were in place, and all the contracts were executed. Everything was automated to go live at midnight, a coordinated digital blast across multiple platforms. It was all, technically, under his operational control. His finger, his click, would be the final authorization. For a moment, a wave of doubt washed over him. This was no longer a theoretical exercise. This would have real-world consequences. It would torch a massive amount of the client's money and could do irreparable damage to the brand's reputation. It was a point of no return. But then he thought of Anna's worried face, of his father's calloused hands, of the soul-crushing humiliation of his performance review. He thought of the email, the cold, calculating words that had laid out the conspiracy to ruin him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the simple, brutal arithmetic of justice. An eye for an eye. A career for a career. He took a deep breath, the quiet hum of the server room filling the silence. He looked at the screen, at the final confirmation prompt. Execute campaign, Titan Q3, Synergy Rising? It was a ridiculous name, one Jessica had come up with herself. He thought of it not as a campaign launch, but as the arming of a beautifully complex, time-delayed bomb. His face was illuminated by the soft glow of the monitor, his expression unreadable, calm. He moved the cursor over the button. The rage that had been a raging inferno was now a cold, controlled point of light, a laser focused on a single objective. He clicked the mouse. The sound was small, insignificant in the vast, empty office, but it echoed with the finality of a closing casket. The trap was set. Now, all he had to do was wait for the screaming to start. The morning after the launch, a thick, cloying atmosphere of forced optimism filled the office. Jessica sent a department-wide email with the subject line, "And so it begins, a new era for Titan," in which she praised the team's fearless innovation. David Chen promptly replied to all, "A testament to true leadership, Jessica. Thrilled to see this bold vision come to life." Liam read the exchange and felt a profound, chilling calm. They were celebrating the christening of a ship they had no idea was already taking on water. He spent the morning as he always did, methodically sorting data, his face an unreadable mask of professional focus. He was a spider, sitting perfectly still in the center of his web, waiting for the first telltale vibrations of struggle. They began in the early afternoon. The first tremors were not in the official reports, which were designed to have a 24-hour lag, but in the chaotic, unfiltered world of social media. The hashtag associated with the campaign, #Synergy Rising, was being mercilessly mocked. The comments on the influencers' sponsored posts were a bloodbath of sarcasm and derision, attacking the brand for its transparent and clumsy attempt to appear authentic. By 3 o'clock, a minor marketing trade blog, known for its snarky commentary, had published a short piece titled, "Innovate's Titan Campaign Sinks Under the Weight of Its Own Buzzwords." Then came the second blow. A series of offensive tweets the influencer had made 2 years prior, something a routine background check would have easily uncovered, were suddenly resurrected by an outraged online mob. The influencer, instead of apologizing, chose to double down, starting a public feud. The campaign was no longer just a failure. It was rapidly becoming a toxic public relations crisis. Jessica's composure began to crack. She spent the afternoon darting in and out of David's office, their hushed, frantic conversation audible through the glass. Finally, she approached Liam's desk, her face pale, a forced smile plastered on her lips. "Liam," she said, her voice strained. "The initial engagement numbers are a little softer than we projected. Can you pull a report for me? Focus on impression, reach, and click-throughs. Let's frame this from a brand awareness perspective for now." Liam knew that impression reach was a vanity metric, a meaningless number that could be easily inflated, and that click-throughs without conversions were worthless. He was being asked to lie with statistics, to build a prettier frame for a picture of a train wreck. "Of course, Jessica," he said, with quiet efficiency. "I'll put that together for you right away." He compiled a beautiful, graphically pleasing report filled with charts that went up and to the right, a masterpiece of technically accurate but contextually deceptive data. He delivered a lie so polished, so professional, that she eagerly accepted it, blind to the fact that he had just handed her a shovel to dig her own grave deeper. The next morning, the dam broke. The Titan client, a notoriously private and reputation-obsessed corporation, had seen the blogs, the social media firestorm, and, most importantly, the report from their own internal team that showed a catastrophic drop in positive brand sentiment. An email, brutally concise, arrived in David Chen's inbox. It was from the client's CEO. "Emergency meeting, 11 a.m. Be prepared to explain the performance of this campaign and your use of our funds." The panic at Innovate was palpable. David and Jessica huddled in the conference room for an hour, their frantic gestures visible to the entire office. 10 minutes before the call, David stormed out and pointed at Liam. "You, in here, now. You're the numbers guy. You're going to help us walk them through the data." Liam felt a cold thrill. They weren't just inviting him to their execution, they were asking him to help load the weapons. The video call was a study in contrasts. On one side of the screen were David and Jessica, looking harried and defensive. On the other side sat a panel of stone-faced executives from the Titan client, led by their CEO, a formidable man named Marcus Thorne. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Thorne began, his voice like gravel. "What I have in front of me is a report detailing a 7-figure expense for a campaign that has not only failed to meet every single key performance indicator, but has actively damaged our brand. Jessica, this was your strategy. Explain it to me." Jessica stammered through her pre-rehearsed talking points about brand disruption and long-term engagement, but Thorne cut her off. "I'm not interested in buzzwords. I'm interested in results." He held up a piece of paper. "I'm looking at an initial projection from your own agency for a digital ad spend that forecast a 35% return on investment. Why was this strategy, which I'm told was the foundation of the Project Titan proposal we signed off on, abandoned in favor of this catastrophe?" David saw his opening and seized it, immediately turning on Jessica. "Marcus, that's an excellent question." Jessica, as the new director, felt a more aggressive approach was warranted. "I cautioned her about the risks, but I ultimately trusted her to lead her department." Jessica looked at David, her expression a mask of pure shock and betrayal. She had been cast adrift. All eyes in the room, both virtual and real, turned to her. She crumbled. I thought the data was inconclusive," she faltered. Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Inconclusive? Mr. Chen, your analyst is on this call. Mr. Carter, was the data inconclusive?" The moment had arrived. The air in the conference room was still. Liam leaned forward, his voice calm and measured. "No, sir. The data was quite clear. The digital ad strategy was projected to be highly successful. The influencer strategy was, from a data perspective, high risk with a low probability of positive ROI." "And did you communicate this analysis to your superiors?" Thorne pressed. "Yes, sir, I did," Liam replied. David's face was turning a dangerous shade of red. "Now, Liam, let's not misrepresent the situation." But it was too late. Thorne silenced him with a raised hand. "Mr. Carter, I'd like to see that communication." Liam looked at David and Jessica, his expression a perfect blank. "Of course," he said. "All of my analysis, as well as the directives I received, were documented via email to ensure full transparency and alignment." With a few clicks, he shared his screen. It was not the secret damning email chain. It was something far more professional and far more lethal. It was his meticulously organized project folder. On the screen, for all to see, was a pristine record of his work. The initial, successful strategy. The follow-up emails in which he politely questioned the new direction while confirming his orders to proceed. The data reports showing the likely negative outcomes. His final confirmation email, which practically spelled out the impending disaster, under the guise of professional compliance. It was a perfect, unassailable paper trail that showed him to be a diligent, responsible analyst and them to be incompetent, reckless leaders. He didn't say a word. He just let the evidence speak for itself. The silence on the call was absolute. He had not accused them of conspiracy, theft, or betrayal. He had simply, calmly, and professionally proven them to be fools. Marcus Thorne stared at the screen for a long moment. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice heavy with finality. "That's all I need to see, David. We'll be in touch." The screen went blank. The call was over. For a full minute, no one in the conference room moved or spoke. Jessica was staring at the table, tears silently streaming down her face. David was a statue of pure fury, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. The man who had been a king in his own glass castle was utterly defeated. Liam calmly stopped sharing his screen, gathered his notepad, and stood up. "If you'll excuse me," he said to the silent room, "I have a report to finish." He walked out of the conference room, leaving the architects of his misery to drown in the wreckage they had created. As he passed through the finance department, he glanced towards Maria's desk. She looked up, and for the first time since he'd known her, she gave him a small, tight, but genuine smile. Justice wasn't always a thunderous verdict. Sometimes, it was just the quiet, satisfying click of a ledger being balanced. As Liam settled back into his chair, the office hummed with a new kind of energy. The silence that had emanated from the glass-walled conference room was not empty. It was heavy with unspoken meaning, a vacuum into which rumors and speculation rushed. No official announcement was made, but corporate environments have a language more subtle and swift than any email. It was in the sudden quiet that fell over conversations when he walked past, in the wide-eyed, sidelong glances from junior analysts, in the way people now seemed to avoid the path to David Chen's office, as if it were contaminated. Liam was no longer the ghost at the feast. He was the ghost who had returned to haunt the living, and the power dynamic of the entire floor had been fractured in the space of a single, catastrophic video call. The first head to roll did so with a quiet, corporate finality. Around 2 o'clock, a black town car, the kind reserved for the highest echelons of the company, pulled up in front of the building. A few minutes later, Charles Henderson, the firm's notoriously ruthless chief operating officer, strode through the office. Henderson was a sleek, silver-haired shark who rarely swam down to the lower floors, and his presence signaled a bloodletting. He didn't look at anyone, his eyes fixed on David Chen's office. He entered without knocking. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. When the door opened, Henderson walked out, his face impassive, and left as quickly as he had arrived. David remained inside for a long time. When he finally emerged, he was a changed man. The arrogance, the swagger, the easy authority, it was all gone, stripped away, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. He walked slowly to his desk, avoiding all eye contact, and began to quietly pack his belongings into a cardboard box. The walk of shame was a sacred, brutal ritual in the corporate world, and David's was agonizing to watch. People he had promoted, people who had laughed at his jokes just that morning, were now staring intently at their screens, suddenly fascinated by spreadsheets. He was being erased in real time. As he walked toward the elevators, box in hand, his reign was officially over. Jessica's fate was a slower, more insidious form of execution. No one came for her. No box was packed. Instead, she was simply left to rot. At 4 o'clock, an email from HR announced that, effective immediately, the marketing department would be under the interim guidance of a senior director from another division. Jessica's name was not mentioned. She had been rendered a non-person. She sat at her new, oversized desk in the director's office, a queen on a throne with no subjects and no authority. The colleagues who had celebrated her promotion now scurried past her glass walls, refusing to meet her gaze. She was a leper, her ambition the source of her contagion. Liam watched her for a moment, not with triumph, but with a kind of detached pity. Her dream had been to climb the ladder, and she had succeeded, only to find that her ladder was perched atop a trapdoor, and she had been the one to spring it. Her punishment was not to be fired, but to be forced to endure the full public weight of her failure and her treachery, isolated in the very office she had sacrificed her integrity to obtain. Her resignation, when it came a week later, was a quiet, pathetic footnote to a story that had already ended. The next morning, Liam was summoned to a meeting with Henderson. The COO's office was on the top floor, a vast, minimalist space with a panoramic view of the city, a perch for a predator. Henderson gestured for him to sit, his demeanor not warm, but clinical. "Carter," he began, "I've reviewed the file. I've spoken with Marcus Thorne. To put it bluntly, you were right, and Chen and Riley were wrong. Their mismanagement has caused this firm's significant reputational and financial damage. That kind of incompetence is not tolerated at Innovate." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The Titan client has agreed to stay with us, on one condition, that you are put in charge of their account, effective immediately. We are officially offering you the position of Senior Marketing Director. The salary will be 30% higher than what Chen was making. You've proven your loyalty and your talent. The company is making this right." There it was, the prize. Everything he had wanted, everything he had bled for, laid out before him on a polished mahogany desk. The title, the money, the corner office, vindication, justice served on a silver platter. He thought of Anna, of the trip to Italy, of the financial security that would lift the weight they had carried for so long. He had won. He had played their ugly, vicious game, and he had emerged the victor. All he had to do was say yes. But as he looked out the vast window at the city below, at the thousands of other glass towers filled with thousands of other people playing the same game, the victory felt strangely hollow. He had exposed the rot, but the rot was in the foundations of the building. He had simply pruned a few dying branches. The tree itself was still diseased. To accept this offer would be to become the new caretaker of a corrupt garden, to tacitly agree that the system worked, because, this time, it had worked for him. He thought of his father's simple creed, work hard, be honest. He had done that, and he had been betrayed. Then he had played by their rules, schemed, manipulated, and destroyed, and now he was being rewarded. What kind of a lesson was that? He looked back at Henderson, who was watching him with an expectant, slightly impatient expression. "Mr. Henderson," Liam began, his voice steady, "I appreciate the offer. I truly do." He took a breath. "But I have to decline." Henderson's eyebrow shot up, the first crack in his icy composure. "And not only do I decline the promotion," Liam continued, a sense of profound clarity and freedom washing over him, "I am also tendering my resignation, effective in 2 weeks." Henderson was momentarily speechless. "You're what? Carter? Do you understand what you're walking away from?" "This is the opportunity of a lifetime. A few months ago, I would have agreed with you," Liam said. "But what I've learned is that Innovate's culture doesn't reward hard work or integrity. It rewards politics and backstabbing. The only reason I'm sitting here is because the consequences of that culture became too expensive to ignore. You're not fixing the problem, you're just patching the hole in the ship because a valuable client noticed it was sinking. I can't be a director in a company whose values I no longer respect. My work on the Titan account is done. My work here is done." For the first time, Liam felt that he was truly in control. He wasn't reacting to them anymore. He was making a choice based not on what they wanted, but on what he needed. He spent the rest of the day in a state of quiet liberation. He packed his small box of personal items, a picture of him and Anna, a few worn-out marketing textbooks, a coffee mug. It was a stark contrast to the large, heavy box David Chen had carried, a box filled with the trinkets of a long but ultimately meaningless career. As he walked through the office for the last time, people watched him with a new, different kind of expression, not fear, not pity, but a stunned, almost reverent respect. He had done the unthinkable. He had won the game, then flipped over the entire board and walked away. His walk to the elevator was not a walk of shame, nor was it a victory lap. It was the calm, steady walk of a free man. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing him off from the world of Innovate for the last time, he didn't feel anger or sadness. He felt a profound sense of peace. He had achieved justice, but it wasn't the justice of a new title or a bigger paycheck. It was the quiet, personal justice of reclaiming one's own soul. Stepping out of the revolving doors of the Innovate building was like surfacing for air after being held underwater for too long. The chaotic symphony of the city, the blare of horns, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of 100 conversations rushed in to fill the silence that the office had imposed on him. He felt the warmth of the afternoon sun on his face, a tangible sensation in a world that had become an endless series of abstract data points and political maneuvers. The small cardboard box in his hands felt impossibly light, containing nothing more than a few personal trinkets, the insignificant flotsam of a decade-long career. He had walked in that morning a prisoner, a ghost. He walked out a free man. He stopped on the bustling sidewalk, took a deep breath that felt like the first one he'd taken in months, and pulled out his phone. He dialed the only number that mattered. Anna answered on the second ring. "Hey, you. Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice laced with the worry she'd been carrying for weeks. "Everything," Liam said, a slow smile spreading across his face, genuine and unforced. "Everything is perfect. I quit, Anna." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, a beat of pure disbelief. "You... what? The promotion? The offer? You quit?" He could hear the whirlwind of questions in her voice. "I'll tell you everything," he said, "but the short version is, I won. And then I realized the prize wasn't worth having. So I walked away." He braced himself for her reaction, for the fear, the anxiety about their future. Instead, what he heard was the sound of her letting out a long, shaky breath, a sound of pure relief. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, and he could hear the tears in her voice. "I was so worried, Liam. Not about the job. I was worried about you, about what this was doing to you. I don't care about the money. I'm so proud of you." In that moment, surrounded by the indifferent rush of the city, Liam felt a sense of victory more profound than any corporate title could ever bestow. He hadn't just won a battle at work. He had remembered what he was truly fighting for. The first week of his unemployment was a strange lesson in deprogramming. His body was still wired to the relentless rhythm of corporate life. He woke bolt upright at 6 a.m. every morning, his heart pounding with an phantom anxiety about a meeting or a deadline that no longer existed. He would instinctively reach for his phone, his thumb swiping across the screen to check for emails that never came. The silence was deafening at first. For 10 years, his mind had been a beehive of activity market trends, client demands, political threats. Now, there was just space. He and Anna took long walks in the park, holding hands, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He rediscovered the simple, grounding pleasure of cooking a meal, of losing himself in the methodical chopping of vegetables. He fixed the leaky faucet under the kitchen sink, a task he'd been putting off for a year, and felt a ridiculous, outsized sense of accomplishment. He was shedding the skin of Liam Carter, senior director, a role he had briefly inhabited, and rediscovering the man he had been before the ambition and the betrayal had nearly consumed him. He was healing. It was during the second week of this quiet sabbatical that the outside world intruded. He was in the backyard, enjoying a cup of coffee, when his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, assuming it was a spam call, but a flicker of curiosity made him answer. "Am I speaking with Liam Carter?" A deep, familiar voice asked. "This is Marcus Thorne." Liam sat up straight, the CEO of the Titan client. "Mr. Thorne," Liam said, his voice steady despite the sudden jolt of adrenaline. "I was sorry to hear you'd left Innovate," Thorne said, his tone direct, with no room for pleasantries. "But I can't say I was surprised. Men of integrity often find it difficult to thrive in a swamp. I was hoping you might be open to having a conversation. I'm in town for a few days." They met for lunch 2 days later, not in a stuffy corporate dining room, but in a small, quiet Italian restaurant downtown. Marcus Thorne in person was exactly as he had been on the video call. Formidable, direct, and with an unnerving ability to see right through any pretense. "I'm not going to waste your time, Carter," Thorne said after they had ordered. What happened at Innovate was a disgrace, but it was also illuminating. It showed me that our most valuable asset, our brand, was in the hands of incompetent children. It also showed me that the one man who actually knew what he was doing and had the courage to document it was being systematically undermined. He leaned forward. My company is terminating its contract with Innovate at the end of the fiscal year. We're bringing our entire marketing division in-house, not just for our brand, but for our entire portfolio of companies. We're building it from the ground up. Liam listened, unsure where this was leading. I'm not looking for another vendor, Thorne continued, his eyes locked on Liam's. I'm looking for a partner. I'm looking for someone to build and lead this new division. Someone whose entire philosophy is built on the truth of the data and the integrity of the work. I'm not offering you a job, Liam. I'm offering you a blank canvas and the resources to build a masterpiece. Your masterpiece. You would answer to no one but me. You would build your own team, establish your own culture, and you would never again have to fight with a fool about the objective truth. It was an offer beyond anything Liam could have imagined. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a chance at redemption, a chance to create the kind of workplace he had always believed should exist, one based on merit, not politics. It was a chance to build something that would last, something that was honest. The money Thorne proposed was significant, far more than even Henderson had offered, but for the first time in his life, the salary was the least interesting part of the conversation. What Thorne was offering was a restoration of faith. That evening, he and Anna sat on their back porch, the same spot where they had once dreamed of a vacation built on the hollow promise of his Innovate promotion. He told her everything about the lunch, about the offer, about the chance to build something new. It feels different this time, he said. With Innovate, the promotion was about taking something back from people who wronged me. This feels like it's about building something for us, something real. Anna took his hand, her eyes shining in the twilight. The other offer was a reward for winning their game, Liam, she said softly. This one is a reward for being you. There's no decision to make. He knew she was right. The journey through the darkness had been long and excruciating. He had been betrayed, broken, and had been forced to forge his anger into a weapon. But standing on the other side, he hadn't just survived. He had been transformed. He had learned that true justice wasn't about revenge, but about rebuilding. It wasn't about tearing down the old, corrupt structures, but about having the courage to build a new one, better and stronger, in its place. He took out his phone and sent a short, simple email to Marcus Thorne. I'm in, it read. When do we start? Liam's new beginning didn't start in a gleaming corner office on the 50th floor. It started in a leased, open-plan space on the 7th floor of a modest building downtown, smelling faintly of fresh paint and new carpet. The key Marcus Thorne had given him felt heavy in his hand, a key not just to a door, but to a new reality. For the first 2 days, Liam was the sole occupant. He walked the empty rooms, the echo of his footsteps, the only sound. There were no ghosts here, no bitter memories etched into the walls, no established hierarchies or hidden resentments. There was only the vast, terrifying, and exhilarating potential of a blank canvas. His first delivery was not a desk, but a massive whiteboard that covered an entire wall. His second was a new laptop, sleek and clean, free from the digital tarnish of Innovate's spyware and political email chains. His new business card simply read, Liam Carter, Vice President, Marketing, Thorne Industries. Before he wrote a single strategic brief or interviewed a single candidate, he spent an entire afternoon with a set of dry erase markers. He stood before the vast white space and began to write not a business plan, but a constitution. It was a direct and visceral rejection of every toxic lesson Innovate had taught him. At the top, in bold letters, he wrote, The way we work. Below, he listed the foundational principles of his new division. The first was radical transparency, with a subpoint. Data is a tool for illumination, not a weapon for manipulation. We share everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The second was ideas over titles, with the addendum. The best idea wins, whether it comes from the VP or the intern. We listen, we respect, we debate, and we commit. Credit is given, never stolen. The third and final principle was the one that mattered most to him. Integrity is the only metric. Beneath it, he wrote, "We do not spin, we do not hide from the truth. We own our failures as openly as we celebrate our successes. Our word is our bond." This was not a corporate mission statement destined to be ignored. It was a promise, a declaration of intent. It was the foundation stone for the sanctuary he intended to build. His first hire was a deliberate statement. He sought out a man named Ben Carter, no relation, a brilliant, grizzled data scientist in his late 60s whom Liam had long admired from afar. Ben had been gracefully retired from a rival firm for being, in his own words, a curmudgeon who preferred being right to being popular. He was a man who spoke the unvarnished, data-backed truth, a habit that made him a political liability in a boardroom but an invaluable asset to someone building a culture of honesty. Liam met him for a 2-hour breakfast that turned into a 4-hour deep dive into market analytics and the failings of modern corporate culture. "I'm not looking for a yes man, Ben," Liam said. "I'm looking for a truth teller, someone who will tell me my ideas are garbage if the numbers say so." Ben, who hadn't been genuinely excited about work in years, agreed on the spot. His second hire was a young, fiercely intelligent, recent graduate named Maya. In her interview, he saw the same raw ambition he'd once seen in Jessica, but it was tempered with a genuine, infectious curiosity and a collaborative spirit. He spent less time asking her about her technical skills and more time posing ethical dilemmas. "What do you do?" he asked, "if a superior asks you to frame a report in a way that is technically true but intentionally misleading?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "I'd show them the honest data and ask why we're afraid of it," she said. "The truth is the truth." In that moment, Liam saw not a protege to be molded, but a future leader to be empowered. He was determined to be the mentor to her that he had tried to be before, to nurture her talent without exposing it to the corrosive politics he now knew how to recognize. His final foundational hire was a masterstroke. He called Maria, the former accountant, from Innovate. She had, as he'd suspected, taken an early retirement package in the chaotic aftermath of the Titan fiasco, fed up with the endless cycle of corporate dishonesty. He met her for coffee near her home in the suburbs. "I'm not asking you to come back to the life you left, Maria," he explained. "I'm asking you to help me build a new one. I need a financial watchdog. Someone with an unwavering ethical compass who will hold me and my entire division accountable for every dollar we spend. I don't want a bookkeeper. I want a guardian of our integrity." Maria, who had been enjoying her garden, found herself intrigued by an offer that appealed not to her bank account, but to her character. The chance to be part of something built on the very principles she had championed in silence for 30 years was too compelling to refuse. With his core team in place, the veteran, the prodigy, and the guardian, they faced their first challenge, reviving a struggling skincare brand within the Thorne Industries portfolio. The brand had a good product but a muddled, inconsistent marketing message. The work environment Liam fostered was unlike anything its members had experienced before. Meetings were lively, collaborative debates. Maya, the youngest person in the room, found her ideas being seriously considered and built upon by Ben, the most senior. When an initial ad concept tested poorly with a focus group, there was no finger-pointing. Liam put the negative feedback up on the whiteboard. "Okay," he said to the team. "The first idea didn't work. Let's break it down. What did we learn? Where does the data tell us to go next?" Failure was treated not as a catastrophe, but as a valuable data point, an opportunity to learn and pivot. They worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a shared, infectious sense of purpose. The final campaign they designed was not flashy or revolutionary. It was simple, honest, and built on a powerful, data-driven insight into their target customer. It spoke to the consumer in an authentic voice, highlighting the product's quality without resorting to hyperbole. When the day came to present the results of the first month to Marcus Thorne, Liam felt a familiar flicker of anxiety, a ghost from his past life. But this time, it was different. He wasn't walking in armed with a CYA paper trail, prepared for a political fight. He was walking in with his team, armed with the simple, undeniable truth of their work. He and Ben walked Thorne through the numbers. They didn't lead with vanity metrics. They showed the hard data: a 15% increase in sales, a 40% jump in positive online sentiment, and a customer acquisition cost that was 20% lower than their target. They showed the successes and also highlighted the areas where the campaign was underperforming and outlined their strategy to improve it. It was a presentation of radical, unvarnished honesty. When they finished, Thorne was quiet for a long moment, looking at the numbers on the screen. He then turned to Liam, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. "When I hired you," Thorne said, his voice quiet but firm, "I wasn't just investing in a marketing director. I was investing in a philosophy. This," he gestured to the screen, "honest work, honest results. This is the validation of that investment." Later that day, Liam stood by the window of their office, looking at his small team. Ben and Maya were at the whiteboard, passionately but respectfully debating a data visualization. Maria was on the phone, calmly but firmly negotiating a better rate with a media vendor. There was a low hum of productive energy, the sound of people who felt safe, respected, and empowered to do their best work. He thought of the noise in the Innovate office, which he now realized had been the sound of fear and quiet desperation. He hadn't just escaped the swamp. He had drained a small piece of it and built a garden. He hadn't just found a new job. He had created a new world, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he was home. 2 years passed, not in a blur, but as a series of distinct, well-earned moments of peace and progress. The marketing division at Thorne Industries, which had started with one man and a whiteboard, was now a thriving team of 20. They were the talk of the industry, a small but formidable powerhouse known for their innovative, data-driven campaigns, and more importantly, for their radically transparent culture. They won awards, not for flashiness, but for effectiveness and integrity. Liam's reputation had been reborn. He was no longer the man who had been passed over, but a respected leader, a sought-after speaker on the topic of building ethical, high-performance teams. The scar from his time at Innovate remained, a faint, silvery reminder of the wound, but it no longer ached. He and Anna had taken that trip to Italy, a glorious 2-week celebration not of a corporate victory, but of their own resilience. They had stood on a balcony, overlooking the Amalfi Coast, the same view from the brochure, and he had felt a sense of contentment so profound it almost felt like a dream. The ghost of his past had been silent for a long time. It was at the annual Adweek conference in New York that he finally saw her again. Liam was there as a keynote panelist, a position that would have been unthinkable to him just a few years prior. He had just finished his session, a candid discussion on truth in advertising, and was making his way through the crowded reception hall, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. And then he saw her, standing alone near a high-top table, stirring a plastic straw in a lukewarm cocktail. It was Jessica Riley. The initial jolt of recognition was sharp, a muscle memory of pain. But then, just as quickly, the feeling dissipated, replaced by a strange, detached curiosity. She looked diminished. The sharp, predatory ambition in her eyes had been replaced by a weary resignation. She was thinner, and the expensive power suit she wore seemed to hang off her, a costume for a role she no longer knew how to play. The name tag pinned to her lapel showed her working for a small, obscure software company he'd barely heard of. She was no longer a rising star. She was just another face in the crowd. He had no intention of approaching her, but as he turned to walk away, she looked up and their eyes met across the room. A flicker of panic, then shame, crossed her face. For a moment, he thought she would turn and flee, but instead, after a long, hesitant pause, she began to make her way towards him, navigating the crowd as if wading through a thick current. "Liam," she said when she finally reached him, her voice barely a whisper. I saw you were speaking. You were really good." The small talk was awkward, painful. "Thank you, Jessica," he replied, his voice neutral. He wasn't going to make this easy for her, but he wouldn't be cruel, either. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. "Look," she finally said, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I know this is years too late, but I am so sorry for what I did to you, to us." She looked up, and for the first time, he saw not the betrayer, but a person consumed by her own choices. I was so desperate to get ahead, she continued, the words tumbling out in a raw, unpolished confession. David saw that. He preyed on it. He told me it was how the game was played. He said you were a dinosaur, that your way of working was naive. He made me believe that taking your work, your ideas, was just seizing an opportunity. He promised me that promotion would be the start of everything. She gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. And it was. It was the start of the end. After you left, and they were both gone, the Titan account was in shambles. The company blamed me for everything. I was a pariah. I lasted 6 more months before they managed me out. No one in the top tier would hire me. The story? It followed me. She was not making excuses, he realized. She was simply stating the facts of her own self-destruction. The ladder she had kicked him from had led nowhere. Liam listened, and as he did, he felt the last, stubborn embers of his old anger finally turn to ash. There was nothing left to hate, only a profound sense of waste. The thing they don't tell you about playing the game, Jessica, he said, his voice softer now, is that you can't win. Even if you get the promotion, you just become the person who has to watch their back, waiting for the next ambitious person you've decided to mentor. You become David Chen. It's a prison. She flinched at the name. I know that now, she whispered. I threw away my integrity, my reputation, for nothing. I wanted you to know that I know it, and that I'm sorry. He looked at her, at the wreckage of her ambition, and he felt a sense of closure that he didn't even know he had been missing. His victory had never been about her failure. It had been about his own survival and rebirth. Her apology was not something he needed to hear, but he realized it was something she desperately needed to say. Thank you for telling me that, Jessica, he said, and he meant it. What you and David did was the most painful professional experience of my life. For a long time, the anger from it was the only thing that kept me going. But I realized that holding on to that anger was like letting you both live in my head, rent-free, forever. And I decided I wanted my space back. I had to let it go to move on. He gave her a small, sad smile. I hope you can find a way to let it go, too. Forgive yourself. That's the only way you'll ever be free of it. It was an absolution she clearly didn't expect. Tears welled in her eyes. Thank you, she said, the words choked with an emotion he knew was genuine. They stood in silence for another moment, 2 strangers bound by a shared, toxic history. And then, with a final, quiet nod, she turned and disappeared back into the anonymous crowd. Liam watched her go, feeling not triumph, but a quiet, philosophical peace. The story was finally, completely, over. He turned and saw his own team, Ben, Maya, and a few of his other senior members waiting for him by the exit, laughing together about something one of them had said. They saw him and waved, their faces open, happy, and full of the easy camaraderie he had fostered. He walked towards them, leaving the ghost of Jessica Riley behind. He was walking toward his present, toward the vibrant, honest world he had built, not from the ashes of his revenge, but from the hard-won clarity of his own integrity. The past was finally where it belonged. A lesson learned, a chapter closed, a distant echo in a life now filled with a much better sound. The flight home from New York was a long, quiet meditation above the clouds. As the sprawling patchwork of the country drifted by thousands of feet below, Liam felt a profound sense of distance, not just from the ground, but from the man he had once been. The encounter with Jessica had been like watching the final scene of a movie he had once starred in, a film filled with turmoil and pain, but he was now just a member of the audience, detached and no longer emotionally invested in the drama. He thought of the burning rage that had once consumed him, the meticulous, cold fury with which he had architected the downfall of David and Jessica. It felt like remembering a character from a book, not a version of himself. He had needed that fire to burn away the rot, but he saw now that the most important part of the journey was not the fire itself, but what he had chosen to build on the cleared ground afterward. He arrived home late, the house quiet and still. He found Anna asleep in their bed, a book resting on her chest. He gently moved it to the nightstand and slid in beside her. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Hey," she murmured sleepily. How was the rest of the conference? It was fine, he said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Something strange happened, though. I saw Jessica Riley. Anna was instantly awake, her expression sharpening with concern. What? What did she say? Was she horrible to you? He shook his head, a small, sad smile on his face. Number. She was broken. She apologized. He told Anna the whole story, the awkward conversation, the raw confession, the final, pathetic image of her disappearing into the crowd. When he finished, Anna was quiet for a long time, processing it. All that scheming, she said softly, all that pain she caused. And in the end, she just ended up alone in a job she probably hates. She got her own kind of justice, I guess. I suppose so, Liam said, looking at the ceiling. But hearing her apologize, it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt sad. It felt like the story was finally over. Anna rolled over to face him, her eyes clear and full of a love that had been his anchor through the entire storm. That story has been over for a long time, Liam, she said. You just had to see the epilogue. Now you're finally free. He knew she was right. The chains of the past hadn't been broken by his revenge, but by his own act of walking away and choosing to build a life where those chains simply couldn't reach him. In the weeks that followed, Liam's focus was entirely on that new life. His role at Thorne Industries had evolved. He was less of a frontline analyst and more of a teacher, a mentor, a guardian of the culture he had so carefully constructed. One afternoon, he saw Maya, his star young analyst, staring at a spreadsheet with a deep frown on her face. Her team had just completed a pilot program, and the results were good, but not the home run they had hoped for. Everything okay? He asked, leaning against her desk. The ROI is solid, she said, frustrated. But if I just exclude this one outlier demographic, it goes from 18% to 22%. It would look so much better in the presentation to Marcus. Liam recognized the temptation instantly. It was the whisper of innovate, the siren song of the small, justifiable lie told in the service of a prettier picture. He pulled up a chair. Tell me about the outlier, he said. Maya explained that a small, unexpected group of older customers had responded poorly. It's messing up the whole narrative, she lamented. So the narrative is more important than the truth? Liam asked gently. She had the grace to look abashed. No, of course not. Maya, he said, our job isn't to tell Marcus what he wants to hear. It's to tell him the truth. The interesting question isn't how to hide this outlier. The interesting question is why they're an outlier. There's a story there, a problem to solve. Hiding it doesn't just compromise our integrity, it makes us strategically blind. Let's dig into that demographic. Let's find out what went wrong. That's not a failure in the report. It's the beginning of our next success. He watched as understanding dawned on her face, the frustration replaced by a renewed intellectual curiosity. He was not just teaching her marketing, he was inoculating her against the disease he had barely survived. He was breaking the cycle. A few nights later, scrolling through his LinkedIn messages, he saw a name he didn't recognize, but the sender's profile listed his former employer, Innovate. The message was short. Mr. Carter, it read. You probably don't remember me, but I was a junior data analyst during your last year at Innovate. I'm writing because I wanted to thank you. We all knew what happened with Project Titan, and we all saw the fallout. But what really stuck with me, and with a lot of the junior staff, was that after you won, you walked away. You turned down the big office. It was a quiet act, but it was the loudest thing I'd ever seen in that building. It made me realize I didn't have to accept that toxic culture as the price of a career. I resigned 6 months later, and I'm now at a company where I am genuinely happy. Your decision had a ripple effect you probably never knew about. Thank you for setting that example. Liam read the message 3 times, a lump forming in his throat. Of all the awards his teams had won, of all the successful campaigns he had launched, this quiet note from a near stranger felt like his greatest professional achievement. His final act at Innovate, born of pain and principle, had not been a surrender. It had been a signal, a beacon of hope for others who felt trapped in the same darkness. He leaned back in his chair, the city lights twinkling outside his window. His long, winding journey finally made sense. Revenge, he now understood, was a surgeon's tool. It was useful for cutting out a cancer, but it could not heal the wound. The healing had come from the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding. And justice? Justice wasn't the satisfying crash of an enemy's downfall. True justice was the quiet hum of a healthy culture, the spark of excitement in a young analyst's eyes, the profound peace of a good day's honest work. It was the restoration of what was lost, not the punishment of the thieves. Success was not the view from the top of a treacherous corporate ladder. It was the view from his own back porch, sitting beside the woman he loved, knowing he had built a life and a career that his father would have been proud of. He looked around his office, at the whiteboard covered in brilliant, honest ideas, at the empty desks of a team that had gone home to their families, tired but fulfilled. He had everything he had ever wanted, and it had nothing to do with the job title on his door. He smiled, grabbed his coat, and turned off the lights. It was time to go home. In the grand, often impersonal architecture of a career, there are moments that define us, intersections of choice and consequence that shape the person we become. For Liam Carter, the journey had been a trial by fire, a forced march through the darkest territories of betrayal and disillusionment. He had emerged not unscathed, but reforged, building a new life on the bedrock of hard-won wisdom. He believed the story was over, that the ghosts of Innovate had been permanently laid to rest. But the universe, in its strange and often ironic way, had one final epilogue to write. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, during a routine video call with Marcus Thorne. They were discussing the coming year's budget when Thorne paused, a rare, wry smile touching his lips. "Oh, before I forget," he said, his tone casual, "I wanted to let you know we're expanding the New York operations. I just closed a deal to acquire some new office space. A real bargain, actually. The previous tenants went under. Company called Innovate. You might have heard of them." Liam stared at his screen, speechless. The words didn't seem to compute. Innovate, acquired, by Thorne Industries. It was a plot twist so absurd, so perfectly ironic. It felt like something from a novel. "They've been in a death spiral for the last couple of years," Thorne continued, oblivious to Liam's stunned silence. "After they lost your account, a few other major clients followed suit. Bad press, terrible morale, a mass exodus of talent. We didn't buy the company, of course, just their assets and their long-term lease on a prime piece of real estate. We'll be moving some of our other divisions into that building over the next few months." Then came the final, perfect twist of the knife. "I was looking at the floor plans," Thorne said, a glint of humor in his eye. "There's a rather large corner office on the 34th floor. Apparently, it belonged to your old boss, Chen. It's got a great view. It's yours if you want it, Liam." A little poetic justice. The offer hung in the air, a shimmering temptation from a past life. The corner office, the symbol of everything he had once craved, the physical manifestation of the victory he had been denied. He could go back, sit in the very chair where David Chen had sealed his fate, and look out over the city as the rightful king of the castle he had helped build. He pictured it in his mind. The glass walls, the sprawling desk, the ghost of David's smug satisfaction. But the image had no power over him anymore. It was like looking at a photograph of a stranger's house. It held no allure, no emotional weight. The man who had desperately wanted that office, who had needed that validation, no longer existed. Liam finally broke his silence, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. "Thank you for the offer, Marcus," he said, and Thorne could hear the finality in his voice. "But I think I'll stay right where I am. We've built something good here. This is our home." He looked around his own office, an open, vibrant space filled with the low hum of collaborative work, with laughter and the sound of keyboards tapping away at honest problems. It wasn't as grand as the corner office at Innovate, but it was real. It was his. Thorne nodded, his smile widening. He had expected nothing less. "Wise choice, Carter," he said. "Some places are better left in the past. After the call, Liam walked to the window and looked out at the city. He thought about the physical space of Innovate, that monument to toxic ambition, soon to be filled with new people, its poisonous history painted over and forgotten. He realized that the power had never been in the real estate, in the titles, or in the corporate letterhead. The power was, and always had been, in the choices people made. David and Jessica had chosen the path of deceit for a prize that ultimately turned to dust. He had chosen the path of integrity, a harder, lonelier road that had led him to a place of profound and lasting peace. His revenge had been a necessary act of survival, the desperate move of a cornered animal. But his true victory, the one that mattered, was not the act of tearing their world down. It was the quiet, patient, day-by-day act of building his own. And so, we leave him there, a man no longer defined by the betrayals he suffered, but by the world he created. For his story is a testament to a quiet but powerful truth that echoes through the sterile hallways of every office building. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much for too long. Do not mistake their compliance for weakness or their patience for surrender. For in that silence, they are not merely suffering, they are observing. They are not just absorbing the blows, they are learning the mechanics of the machine that delivers them. And in the quietest corners of their minds, they are not just enduring, they are becoming the architects of a justice the system was never designed to deliver. A justice that is personal, precise, and absolute. Every office has its ghosts, its untold stories of quiet triumphs and silent betrayals. What stories do the walls of your workplace hold? Join us next time as we explore another tale of the hidden wars fought in plain sight, right here